who is a multilingual public affairs strategist with experiences across all levels of Canadian government. He was a candidate in the 2019 Rideau-Rockcliffe municipal by-election, and he represented the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario both in the 2020 Ottawa-Vanier by-election and the 2022 Ontario general election under the leadership of Premier Doug Ford. He's fluent in 4 languages, English, French, German, and Lingala, and he brings an inclusive global perspective to politics, which is grounded in community engagement, in cross-cultural advocacy, and first-hand experience navigating policy and campaigning. He's very kindly agreed to do this workshop for us, which is completely relevant to issues that we've been talking about. So please join me in welcoming Patrick to this class. And just some housekeeping issues. You each have a sheet with you. Please make sure that you write your name and your student ID number. Patrick has agreed, he's kind of devised an exercise for you, and you will have to do it and then submit it to me, and that will also count towards your class participation. It's 5% for this exercise. So thank you, Patrick, for devising this evaluation. And those of you, like the event is being filmed, so those of you who do not want to appear in the video, please raise your hands. Okay, perfectly. So the camera is focused on Patrick, and we will make sure that you're not filmed without your consent at all. So thank you again, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Carleton University, for having me. Thank you, Professor, for having me. We've been in discussion for almost all the summer, since around June. And there was a previous session that we had, which was a workshop, which was basically advertised here by the Department of Political Science. And it was pretty good. I mean, our cameraman here attended, right? So he can attest, right? So I think that this is a great university. I went here. We were talking about it a couple of years ago. I'm not gonna date myself, but I did both my undergrad and my MA here, and I think Carleton has been very, very. I really feel at home, right? I mean, even when I was living in Toronto, coming here in Ottawa is home. Like the professor said, I speak 4 languages. I mean, globalization is great, right? Movement of people. I mean, I lived in 5 countries. Ich spreche Deutsch, ich parle français bien sûr, then also Lingala, Congo. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And like I said, English, I've been here for about 25 years. I came when I was a kid, you know, immigrant story. Parents came here, my parents are missionary pastors. I have a lot of hats, you know, that I wear. So basically, I do politics, academic. I'm also an assistant pastor at my church with my parents. So, and I love politics, especially theory. So during my undergrad years, I was really focused on political philosophy, right? And coming to Carleton Political Science, I had a question, right? Participation and representation. What does participation and representation look like, right? What do we want? So for me as a student, it was something really driving, because you're always in the outside of power. You see power is reflected all around you, but do you wield any power? So as a person of color, right, as an immigrant, as a francophone, there's a lot of, hats which, I had to navigate with, right? So for me, running in my first political campaign was in 2018, Rideau-Rockcliffe by-election, and then that went on to 2020, which I caught the Premier's eye, right? So I did not know anybody at the provincial level. Like Doug Ford, I used to watch him on TV just like anybody, right? So, but I did something, right? And I willed to power. So basically, in the sense that I wanted to be part of that stage, right? As a university student, you read it, you look at it, but what does it look like to be part, to participate, to represent the causes that's close to your heart, right? So I have a two-way presentation. So like you see, this is some of PowerPoint, which I'll go into it later, which has to do with the activity that I want to do too. But I wanted to start off, and I wrote this, bear with me, I wrote this last night, and as I was pondering how to address and present my presentation and to address the class, because this class is particular, right? When we talk about gender and politics, right? Gender in term with many terms, right? And politics that globalizes all of us. Everything is political, you know? Even breathing is political, right? So something that we take for granted, some parts of the world, you can't even breathe, right? So, and so we look at it. So I want to introduce, and guys, just pay attention. I'll read it through, and then we'll discuss it, and we'll get our brains really into the zone, right? So I will read it. So this, again, I said I wrote it last night. When we talk about political representation and political participation, who do we include in that broad spectrum? Blacks, whites, women, men, trans people, rich, poor, disabled, able people, weak people, strong people, good people, bad people, criminals, upstanding citizens, young people, old, children, adults, humans, animals, humanoid, android. When we talk about participation and representation, who do we include? There's a reading from your coursework that is titled White Privilege and Male Privilege, where the author, Peggy McIntosh, accounts her awakening to, that's according to my my analysis of the text, where her awakening to, or self-actualization of the peripheries of power. So she has come into an understanding where she, in relationship to power, where she is, right? Where she stands. So her realization that she is not a stranger or outside the influence, but is the very definition of power itself, albeit in its variant form, is where I want to open this session, right? So, for many instances, power is expressed and defined by the dual accounts of opposites in societies. For example, oppressors versus the oppressed, the powerful versus the weak, the rich versus the poor. Gender, in its very definition, is just one interpretation of thousands that hasn't been able to leave or surpass the compounds of power. So what I mean by that, even the word gender, even gender itself, is in the compounds of power, describe true power. So it's not like this entity outside power. It's in power, defined by power. So I said, again, which itself has become the form of power itself. Because it defines things, that's gender. It classifies things, and by its own virtue creates and negates things. Negation is just, it eliminates things. Okay, Michael Foucault describes power as relational, as dynamic. If you guys know French philosopher, Michael Foucault. As dynamic, dispersed, and constantly exercised through social interaction and institutions. We are social beings, we're a social animal, we're a political animal, according to Aristotle, right? Man is a political animal, you know? So, again, it says here, power is productive, shaping knowledge. This is according to Foucault, subjectivity in the very bodies of individuals through mechanisms like surveillance and discipline. Power is a strategic system of actions on action. So Foucault says power is a tool to basically control action. So your action reverberates and creates different actions. So when I continue and I say, those who speak on power are either power themselves or those who are seeking power. One thing to understand is that no one leaves the confines of power. None of us. You know, it could be there are no free bystanders or unaffected agents. Everyone is given a priori or takes up the resistive role of conflict in society. There is no bystanders, free agents. Oh, that doesn't concern me. We're all in this global mechanism. Everyone. An action that happens maybe in the Congo mines will affect us because what? Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone has something. So we're all included in this vacuum of conflict, which is power. You know. So I'm using the word conflict very lightly because there is good conflict, right? Conflict itself is discourse. People are there to have conversation. Your interpretation of the matter, whether it be true, whether it be whatever, you are allowed to bring that forth into society. So I'll continue. I'm almost done. I promise. So again, I want to stress that no one has gone beyond the Archimedean point. I mean, here, Archimedean point, I will describe what I mean by that, which is a hypothetical viewpoint from which certain objective truths can be perfectly perceived. The term refers to the great mathematician Archimedes, who claimed that he could lift the earth off its foundation if he were given a place to stand, one solid point, and a long enough lever. So what we mean by that, in other words, a view from an Archimedean point describes the ideal of removing oneself from the object of study, so that one can see it in relation to all other things, while remaining independent of them. I believe that no one can do that in this world. So you're always, even though you want to have, a projective or a true interpretation, non-biased, you can't be. There's always something that will fuel interest. You can't separate yourself. So this is why I say here, surely, if we go back to Peggy McIntosh and her description of white privilege and male privilege as a woman, what she forgets is, surely McIntosh is not, albeit she is a woman, right? She hasn't removed herself like this independent, scholar, to study white privilege and male privilege, right? So, but she hasn't moved an inch from the discord that is her, because again, she is power itself by being a woman, by being a white woman. Of course, Foucault surely hasn't either, due to the fact that he exhibits some of the traits of what academically he is describing, which is power. He is in a position of power himself. Even teaching is in a position of power, So, again, let me surprise you guys. Don't be surprised when I say even I, the one speaking right now, have not moved and will not move from the axiom of power, which I stand in. Power is not bound or shackled to race, slavery, or even what we consider identity or identities, which weak individual uses to suppress the other in society. So what is power? Power to me is the self-realization of a person's ability or inability to navigate the materialistic world we live in. The pursuit of power, the limitation of power, and the wielding of power are all activities which find its root cause in this plane of existence. So to conclude, therefore, the evolution of society also reevaluates the question and fundamental question of one's existence, raison d'être. There is a book by Hannah Arendt that influenced my thinking. The book titled The Human Condition. In the introduction, the commentator, Margaret Conovan, says, only the experience of sharing a common human world with others who look at it from different perspectives can enable us to see reality in the round and develop shared common sense. Human beings are plural and mortal. It is these features of the human condition that give politics both its miraculous openness and its desperate contingency. So, I know it was a lot, but I wanted to start my presentation really on that aspect of bringing your mind to what we see power. How do we view power? Power is viewed, like we said, I can ask a lot of people here. We all have our own interpretation of what we think power is and how we think things should be, right? So no one sits like a judge to say, this is how it is. We're all outsiders, but not free agent. We're all controlled by power. I mean, someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau was saying, man is enchained wherever. Society chains us, So anybody will say, oh, I have this great idea, blah, blah. You realize very quick how deep, right? You may be a free thinker in your mind, but as long as you bring it out to the open, it is restraint. But like I said, power, as I view it itself, is not bound. Power in its own. Even someone who has no power has power. So I know I talked a lot, and I want to go into the presentation because I wanted you guys to see when I ran, why did I run? What pushed me and what motivated me to run? This class, like I said, is a class on gender and politics. Someone like myself who has multiple identities, how would I view power? What drives me? What irks me? So again, when you look at some of the signs here, you want to look and act and be on that stage, just like them, right? Professional. You have to look good out there for people to take you seriously. Power sometimes comes at the image of the strong, of the rich, because they are the ones who are able to navigate much more easily than some of us, right? So I had to look my part, right? I was really young right there. And again, you see all those signs, right? If I didn't have a sign, would I be in that stage? Voters will not take me seriously, right? I want to run, but you know what? Where's your campaign material, right? So you have to, if you want to engage those in power, and if you want to change society, and that's according to my own thinking, take everything in a grain of salt. This is just me thinking out loud, not being given the stage. You have to look powerful. So I don't know if there's any questions, because I will answer those questions based on this, because I really want it to be interactive, and then we can go into the process of my campaigning, and also into the process of I really wanted to have the activities that I gave you. It's 17 candidates are in, but I took just 7, including myself, to have a comparison, a study of who are those individuals, where do they fit in the social class, right? And so I know that we'll do, and I think that with your help, we can really decipher and go deep into what makes a political candidate. And so I'll stop there and ask for questions. I mean, what do you guys think about what I wrote? I wrote this like at 3 a.m. last night, and it was like, what do you think? Because this is a gender class. What do you think when I say that, I can read this part right here. When we talk about political representation, right? Those who are seeking power, those who want to be represented and participate, what does it look like? Who do we include and who do we exclude? So yes, that's a very good question. Did anybody get it? When we talk about political participation, do we talk about it, let me just take your words and broaden it up a little bit. Do we talk about it in accordance to group thinking? Or do we talk about it according to an individual thought, an individual person? Is it something like that? I am on the latter side. It's not what society should say or who we should think. I think the individual in a sense on who wants to, right? who wants to, you know, like, I shouldn't be told how I want to fix my garden, you know? City politics sometimes will tell you, you want to build your house, like, oh, they come in, right? So, but in an ideal society, in, you know, what you want to do should come deep within what's in your heart, the well-being that you want to express in nature. Anybody else? Yes. Okay, that's a very good question. I mean, I'll go back to my own story, right? I've always lived in social housing, right? And I mean, as immigrants, my parents came here. You know, the immigrant story sometimes, right? Your parents have to give up, or you know, somewhat of a luxurious or whatever class they were to restart. You know, Canada promises a future for your children, you know, and everything. And then some of the struggles, right, of others who have and those who have not. Others who it's easier because of the connection and the network that they have, the base, the foundation, and someone that just goes out there and is like, how am I gonna get in there? How am I gonna knock on the door, right? There's, you know, but there is a door. You know, it's not like there is no door, there is a door. But how do you enter that door to be included in here? One of the first things that you need to realize that I was talking to Professor Solika. Yes, okay. And she was saying that, how did you get the idea of doing this presentation? And because sometimes we have speakers that come in, politicians, other members of society, and they just tell you a story about the politics and what they're doing, but never actually, oh, how did I open that key? You know, when it was a nobody to get in there, when it was like even the presentation workshop we have from candidate to student, from student to candidate, right? How do you open that key, right? So when I was just a volunteer for a lot of these politicians. I volunteered in city politics here for the Liberals and the Conservatives later on. When it was a university student here, I was very liberal, you know. Volunteered because what I thought was opportunity. Those who give me opportunity. And what does opportunity look like? But let's not get it twisted. Those who give you opportunity also come with a veil on how opportunity should look like to you. So they impose. You know, so you're not a free agent, even though you want to be part of it, but there is a rule and game and how to behave that basically sometimes contradicts your definition, right? And so as a student, as a volunteer, I always liked those politicians who are coming to those neighborhoods, you know, rough neighborhoods, you know, comedian, seeking votes, you know, like they're so far removed. The life that those people are living, you know, is probably different than the life he is trying to get votes. He's probably lives somewhere in Rideau-Rockcliffe, for example, and he's gonna be city councilor for the whole ward, right? But he has to come down to probably somewhere, I don't know, maybe Carson Grove, if you know, East Ulster there, and gain some votes in one of those tough neighborhoods of social housing. But, you know, there are different people, live different experiences, lifestyle, but he still has to convince. But what truly is he? So for me, that aspect of a politician coming in and he's like, oh, I'm looking for votes, can you vote for me, blah, 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 right? I'll be like, yeah, sure, you know, but what you gonna do? And then again, I also had my own incentive, right? I wanted a job, right? So everything, you know, I wanted to work, right? So they're like, oh yeah, you know, a lot of promises are given, you knock on doors, and sometimes they already have their team, you know, that they picked. You were just, you know, someone that came by and, you know, like he needed your vote, but who tells you that you're going to be part of his team, that he's going to train you like what they say, right? Politicians come into a rough neighborhood to fix the neighborhood. You know, I always said, if you really want to fix something, you teach the person that you want how to do it. Not you know, letting him like this and you working. No, we want people to work for themselves and to be independent. Free, give me a sec. And so I looked at that, and for me it was, yeah, I want to participate because I know my problem. He does not know the problem. He comes in and goes up, right? But the problem still remains in the community. So I want to be the one that actually is able to represent and tackle those issues, right? Because politics for me was really deeply rooted in what I was living, you know? So it wasn't just a job. For him, he's probably, Rockcliffe, well paid, has a good job, and it turns out to be a job, right? But some people, it's their whole livelihoods, right? Their whole experience, right? So how real is politics, right? So again, when it came to me wanting to run, to answer your question, I was like, okay, how do I get this? How do I do this? Vendors, how do you do campaign materials? That knowledge is like sealed. You have to talk and find. It's not like, oh, you walk in here, this is how you do it. Because if it was as easy as that, everybody would do it. So a certain few people, have that knowledge. It's not like that knowledge is not accessible. It's like you have to start navigating in those fields. And to navigate in those fields, it doesn't mean that you have or have not. You can cross the street. Everybody can cross the street. Nobody owns the street. Yes, the city owns the street, but you can still walk and see and look around. Those who have and those who have not are walking in the same road. So you're not being stopped, So when we look at power relationships, sometimes you have to start, even those who don't have power, have to start looking at themselves in a position of have. How? You have to shift your mind and your brain, to not accept what you're being conditioned as. I said here at the end, let me read this again at the end when I was talking about myself. I said, don't be surprised when I say even I, the one speaking right now, have not moved and will not move from the axiom of power. I hold power. I hold power. If you look at my resume, if you look at the experience, what does power look like? Sometimes you view power as, oh, you have to sit on this golden throne. No! Power is the act, the ability to move forward in whatever constrains you. So you hear stories of people getting out of crazy situation because they believed in themselves, right? And they didn't accept what society puts as a barrier. So when I started this, I knew that the only way to be taken seriously, I have to get all this. I have to have a website. I have to have campaign materials. I gotta do a lot of things. So yes, you may not have, but in the pursuit of looking, I'm pretty sure you will find. There'll be people out there that will open doors. There's organizations. We see it. There are organizations out there that help people who don't have anything, right? So we're not talking about we're in this world where everything is impossible. No, don't limit yourself. Let's not limit ourselves. Anybody else? Sorry. Okay, so I think.
Questions.
I'm sorry. One more question, then we can go into the presentation. Yes. All right. So okay. So I think it was similar to her kind of question. How do we get power? Those who don't have power. So you have a whole class on the revolutions. Those who don't have power doesn't mean that they don't have power. You don't see power. But when they decide to will power, you see chaos. You see destruction. You see conflict. Everything. So truly, no one truly doesn't have power. Everyone. This is why I am sticking to it. Everyone has power. You just don't know it yet. They just don't let you see it yet. Power is very controlled. Remember when I said Foucault talks about surveillance? Power is in the institutions. Oh, you can go into that door. Employees only. Power sometimes is legislative, right? Oh, do you have a university degree? Right? Power is, there's so many ways power takes form. Yes. It is very intimidating. We'll go into the conversation, the presentation, then maybe you'll have a question. But it is intimidating. That's what they want you to think. You need just a few people to control the whole mass, right? And again, they say that democracy, according to the ancients, democracy was the worst form of government because it's the mass. the uneducated. You know, nowadays we deal with ChatGPT, we deal with technology that is way out there. How do we control that, right? Everyone has access to information, but what kind of information, right? There's this, you know, like fake news. You know, it's been the last 10 years, 12 years, it's been buzzing, right? Fake news. There's also this terminology of conspiracy theories, right? Buzzing, right? All those are terms that we choose to elevate and denigrate, right? Nowadays, if government is like, oh, conspiracies are good, everybody will say conspiracies are good. If government is saying fake news is actually not fake news. So basically, power channels are very controlled. Let's go into the presentation. Okay, so as I said, comprehensive overview of political candidate profiles, right? So I want to show you guys something here. All right, so as you can see, it says right here, this is the green guy with his poster right here. Your voice at the table, right? So very, those are the slogans that were being shot out there, right? So I want to let you guys know that this was Rideau-Rockcliffe by-election, right? So there was 17 candidates. It was like crazy. So I remember I was like the 6th candidate to register. And I did not know anything. Like seriously, like if you knew my profile, stepping into that zone of politics and going to the public, right? I was an MA student. I think I don't know if I finished or was finishing. I didn't have a job in the government. Maybe I didn't do my what's it called? You know, like. I swept pretty much fine, so I was nowhere. I was outside the peripheries of power. I was flipping burgers at McDonald's doing a night shift, right? And I had big dreams. You know, big dreams to shake up the city with McDonald's, right? But it is the mind, right? Because I didn't see myself as just a worker at McDonald's. I saw myself as an active participant or an active agent that wants change. And it's not where you are that defines what you can do, right? So I went out there with the profile I had no political experience. So how do I manage this? Because of the workshop it came up, one of the students asked the question, like, how do you do this? I was like, listen, I went to school, I went to university here, and one thing I learned about how do you enter this conversation when you don't know anything. I started out this way. When I decided I wanted to run, I knew that there was a conversation already out there that I'm not part of, that it's being written, spoken for me. I want to know what they're saying, right? So I picked up newspapers of previous candidates, what they said, right, in municipal politics. I started watching videos, right? So the same people that are running here ran 4 years ago, right? Some of them are old, so you can realize. And it was like, oh yeah, this guy said that. Oh, no, that's nice. So I started if you're an MA student or any student in academia, literature review. So the things I've learned in university, I started using it in real life, and it was like, okay, you know, I can't just bring my ideas, you know, like I have to know what they're talking about and try to know the conversation and bring my part into that conversation. So I started doing research, started doing seeking out interviews, checking out community centers and seeing and not just reading, but being there and seeing, talking to those who are impacted by the politics that these people are going to be doing. That's how I started. Second, I realized that, okay, so I talked about vendor. I mean, how do I get the materials? You know, what funds do I have, right? So all this came into play, right? Into being able to navigate this political apparatus, right? So you can't say, I want to represent the city when there's nothing in the bank, when you're at zero. You know, when you don't even know where the vendors are to do this, right? So yeah, there's a limitation, but you have to overcome those limitations. You have to find, you have to seek, you have to search, if you have to break doors. I'm not advocating violence, but I'm advocating the spirit of a revolutionary mind You know, if they're stopping you from accessing what is yours, you break the door mentally and tell them that, you know what, I'm not just a McDonald's worker. Hey, look at the sign I did. These people, some of them were, public officials, some of them were, they worked for government. You put yourself out there and you thought, oh my gosh, this young man, where does he work at? Nobody would say, oh, he works at McDonald's, because you look the part, right? So, let's continue. So, you look at here. So, I started going out there and debating, right? So, and you can see, this is like, 5, 6 years ago. I look at these people out there, and I knew each candidate because I don't know how long the campaign was, but we got to know and, share common spaces, and we built a sense of friendship, right, and camaraderie, and when you look at that, right, we're opponents, but we're also, not just competitors, we're also those kind of this weird friendship that you're competing in the same thing, right? So, so I was out there, doing, and then this was when Doug, the Premier found me, right? Because, let me tell you this, the Premier is just not finding anybody, right? I'm a nobody, right? So, they had their seat wide and far, right? So you have to distinguish yourself for someone like this guy in a real party to come and knock at your door. So I'm not trying to praise myself, but I'm trying to tell you where I was and how I attracted politics and how I made politics. JFK said, do not ask what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do. So in my mind, I saw myself, I'm not seen in the city. My problems are not heard. I'm tired of working this bullshit job. Nobody wants to give me a job. You can cry, or you can do something about it. I definitely did something about it, right? So, and suddenly this guy that I was watching on TV suddenly becomes real. I'm not talking about fairy tales. People sometimes think it's impossible, or where imagination, ambition, desire be real. And I projected what I wanted, and suddenly they appeared, right? Okay, so let's talk about the candidate interview questions. I don't know, so if you guys had a chance to, we can do it together. I gave you guys that exercise. Who has read it? I don't know. I gave. No, it's fine. Have you guys actually looked at it? What we're talking about? You guys know? Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So we'll do it together. So
maybe
yeah.
we can look at the questions and then take a break.
Yes, we can look at the question and take a break. Sorry. So like here, so some of the questions that what we're gonna do as an activity is basically there was 17 candidates, like I said, and each candidate was given these 5 questions. So we walked into a room at Rockcliffe, right? Because I think that's where they made politicians, and these people, very, that's just rich folks, right? You see, and that's what I realized that politics sometimes is, you gotta convince them. It's not just my buddies that I want to represent. These people who wield power, because they're the ones who are gonna vote. Right? So, and they go there and ask us the first question: what is the driving force that brought you to run? Describe an example of your past experiences when you have driven an initiative to completion in a dysfunctional, challenging environment. 3, what is your vision for the city and what needs to happen in Ward 13 to make it so? 4, what are the obstacles to implementing your vision in Ward 13 and how would you deal with them? 5, what are the 3 tools in your toolbox that will make you effective at City Hall? And how have you demonstrated their use in the past? So those questions, I kid you not, the me that's now is like, that's nothing. But the me that was back then that had nothing, that's trying to prove myself and be not ridiculous, not just a dreamer, but an actual candidate that voters will vote for and these people look seriously. It was a little intimidating, and you'll see, according to each candidate, how they answer those questions, and you also see my answers, and it will take you to the state of mind I was in, because each candidate had a different state of mind. We'll leave it here for now.
Should we take a quick 10 minutes break and come back?
Just a professional class and economic environment the candidate may hail from, social capital, education of the candidate, cultural and geographic context, what does each candidate mean when talking about Ottawa and implementing their vision, gender and professional identity, values and ideological orientation of each candidate. So I realized that I have the questions of each candidate right here, and we can read it together. We're only going to do 7, you know? So we want to compare it, maybe even less than 7 if it takes too long. But I want you guys to realize something and see how different each candidate is, right? So all of us 17 are going in there to be city councilor, to replace Toby Newsbound. So Toby was a guy who was leaving, and he probably did 2 years, and it triggered a by-election, right? So he was leaving in the middle of his mandate, right? So, and then 17 people from that community, Rideau-Rockcliffe, which is Ward 13, decided to run. And each of them had a different vision of what they want the city to look like, what they want to do for the residents of the ward, right? So when you look at those interview questions, I think that it will get you a sense of, okay, that person was in this stage of his life, right? For me personally, when you read mine, you're like, oh my gosh, he was this stage of his life. So this is what I want you guys to exercise on. So I'll read the first candidate. Mark Dorgerville. Actually, Mark is a funny guy. He was very French, like Parisian French, right? So I used to talk to him, and if you look at his candidate profile, he says, my priorities are the environment and social issues. So I have Mark's interview right here, so I'll read it a bit. It says here, they asked Mark, so he was the candidate 1, right? They asked him, what is the driving force that brought you to run? He says, my priorities are the environment and social issues. So I want you guys to pay attention because you guys should write it down. This is his candidate portfolio. He says here, my priorities are the environment and social issues. I believe that an outsider can bring fresh eyes to the process of City Hall, thereby spurring badly needed innovative thinking. City Council needs an ideas broker able to accelerate the pace of decision making. I want to redress how development planning is done in the city, which appears to be based in part on asking for citizen input and ignoring the resulting feedback. So this is for question number 1, when he talks about his priorities. He says for environmental and social issues. So that should bring him back a bell. So second, describe an example of your past experience when you have driven an initiative to completion in a dysfunctional or challenging environment. So this is number 2. I said challenges need to be confronted head on. So what does he mean by challenges need to be confronted? So this is what he says. My children attended a cooperative daycare where parents as a group provided the necessary care for their and each other's children. This became a challenging environment insofar as parents often held opposing view on the nature of the care needed, and the atmosphere became one of dysfunctional tension. So he says it right here, right? So he attended, his children attended a daycare with other parents, and there was conflict, right? Because of different ways of viewing and caring for the children. So he says, knowing that nothing works better than direct face-to-face interaction in such situations, I was able to diffuse the tension, which then led to a positive collaboration among participating parents to the benefit of all the children involved. Are you guys kind of a little bit understanding what we're doing, right? What you're doing is basically writing down, because we're going to go through each candidate profile, we're doing 7 of them. So the questions that 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 are based upon their answers when they gave in the interview. So what I want you to do is capture those 5 questions that they gave, which I'm giving you guys. This is just a short version, but you can see from the look, from what it says, it gives you a candidate portfolio of the person. Then I want you later on to compare, we can talk about it. Okay, Mark, right? Social status, you probably, high middle class, right? His viewpoint. So it gives you an interpretation of what kind of candidates we're running, yes. What he gives, right? He talks to, he says right here, continue, he says he used to be a scientist, right? And worked at different jobs. Like other people will say, that they said that they're working for the government. So it gives you a picture. It's not 100%, but from my point of view, when I was looking at each and every candidate in front of me, they were not me. They were not working. They were so far ahead, in their status. So it's based upon, when you look at it, it's not 100% true. It's just an interpretation, and this is just an activity that when you look at a candidate, right? So we may be wrong, we may be right. It's just putting it out there and thinking about it. So yeah. It's an activity of how do you, because when you're a voter, when you vote for someone, it has to attract, it has to find you. Does he appeal to you? You're not all going to be like one answer. If we all had one answer, then why do we go to vote? Why do we have different parties? So do you understand where this is rooted at? This is rooted at the core of political analysis, analyzing the voter, the person that's trying to run in front of you. Does he appeal to me? What do we have in common? So of course, my answer and your answer will be different, right? It has to be different, right? So feel free. There is no right and wrong answer. Yes, sir. Because the only way, I want you guys to put that hat of you're a voter in that right. Of course you're not. You don't know anything, and this is why it's a class activity. But when people come and knock at your door, and they want to run, you want to know where they're from. Is there a, like you said, Rideau-Rockcliffe is such diverse community, from rich and poor. The Prime Minister's, residence is in that riding, and I was in that riding too. So, yeah, can we move forward? Cool. So number 3, the question is, what is your vision for the city? What needs to happen in Ward 13? So this is what he says. I said, by virtue of its diversity, social equality is needed. So he says here, Rideau-Rockcliffe is a macrocosm of the city, which by virtue of its diversity, making it an ideal model for affecting change. City council decisions are important for neighborhoods, transportation. So he goes into deep. He talks about, just take, for number 3, just right, he talks about diversity and social equality is needed in that diverse writing or word that he's talking about. So this is what he's trying to explain, right? So so that's for number 3. Number 4, what are the obstacles? What are the obstacles implementing your vision for Ward 13, and how would you deal with them? So they're asking in the interview question, what are some of the obstacles for you not to achieve the vision that you want to implement, right? So he says, let's see, low-level citizen engagement in Ward 13 is a major obstacle. So he talks about it, he says, the low level of citizen engagement in Ward 13 is a major obstacle. Whoever is elected to council position must work hard to convince folks that he or she represents everyone in the ward and that their engagement in change process is critical. So, yes, sorry. Good question. Okay, so politics. If you go to political science, political government or political ward. A ward is an area, right? Where you're voting, right? So municipal, there is ward. Provincial, there is ridings. You've probably heard of a riding, right? Federal riding, provincial riding. So when you get to municipal politics, it becomes wards. It's called ward, right? A ward is Ward 13. There's a Rideau-Rockcliffe is Ward 13. It's just the name of the area he's running in. Yeah, Ward 13. Or Vanier, Ward 11 or something like that, Ward 12. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll do this and then we'll do another candidate and we'll try to compare so we can make it easier. Okay, so they asked them, what are the 3 tools in your toolbox that will make you effective at City Hall? at City Hall, and how have you demonstrated their use in the past? So he says, volunteer, he used to be an accountant and a climate scientist. So he says here, being a volunteer and income tax advisor for low-income residents in Ward 13 was for me a transformative experience. Empathize with and understand these challenges. By profession, I was a climate scientist and now work in accountancy. I have strong analytical capabilities and fact-based approach. So he talks about how effective and why he should be the candidate or the city, why he should be city councilor in that Ward 13. So let's just do a comparison. Let's do another one and do a comparison, and we'll see how it works. Okay, he's a little bit much of the same. Let's do someone else. Okay, here's Ralston King. You guys probably seen this guy. Yeah, anybody know who Ralston King is? Okay, go ahead. Anybody else, Ralston King? What is he known for? He's a politician, right? He's the guy who won. He's actually the guy who, out of the 17 candidates, Ralston King came up on top. And it was really funny, right? Because Ralston King has been part of the community. He had a lot of experience. When I was going in, I was looking for people, like-minded people, right? Because I thought that, so I was so outside the political thinking. I was so young, green, not knowing. So I approached Ralston King, right? So I always tell this story because it's funny, right? He sees me as an opponent. I don't see myself as an opponent. I see myself as someone trying to navigate and learn. And Ralston King is like taking his distance, right? And I was like, yeah, that dude's funny, right? Why is he like, we're both black, But I quickly learned that you're a political opponent. Of course, he has to have his distance with you, strategies. It's like, bro, I'm not gonna help you out. You decided to run, So for me, I had to put that political mindset and realize that, he's not trying to be mean or bad, or I can't be looking at him as a mentor when we're competing in the same thing, right? So that is also part of that local education. So I said here, Ralston King, 10 years community building president of Overbrook Community. So he had a stellar resume. He was aiming for this job for a very long time. So association board member of Rideau-Rockcliffe Community Resources Central for 7 years, and a member of the Community Liberty Council for Police Services. Dialogue over. Okay, so here when you look at him, the same question. Question number one, we're gonna ask him, what is the driving force that brought you to run? So for Ralston King, he talks about his experience, right? 10 years he's been in that community. He's been building, fostering relationships. If you want to represent your writing, you're not just gonna be like I who just stepped up from, living in my parents' basement. It's like, I wanna run. Nobody knows you in the city. Who the hell are you, right? Yes, you have a sad story, you started from the bottom, now I'm here, but there have been people who have been working for this tirelessly, that build connections, look at the association board member, president of Rideau-Rockcliffe. They had such a resume that I was like, oh my God, right? So this is what you're dealing with, right? So he talks about his reasons why he thinks he should be the next city councilor, and he became the first black city councilor in the city. Number two, describe an example of your past experience. So they asked him that. So he says here, dialogue over contested issues and mediation. So he says, working, for a counselor's office, he was working as a staffer for another counselor. He realizes how much conflict is in city politics. Conflict is everywhere where people are, right? So he has learned that how do we navigate these conflicts and how do we have a dialogue where it's respectable? So he's talking from his experience, right? So number three, to ask him, what is your vision for the city and what needs to happen in Ward 13 to make it so? So he says, public safety and child poverty, mainstream concerns, not just pasted add-ons, right? So he says we really Ward 13, my friend right here said, it's very diverse. There's the rich, and there's also the very poor. There's a lot of poverty in Ottawa-Vanier or Rideau-Rockcliffe, right? So it's like, what do we do to address these issues, right? So that's what he talks about. Number 4, what are the obstacles of implementing a vision for Ward 13? So he says the City of Ottawa governance structure is very complex. Council has different viewpoints. Consensus must be based on holistic viewport of the city. Diplomatic and good listener. So he talks about that it's very complex. We need people that actually know things, people that actually been there, right? So number 5, what are the 3 tools he says? He says diplomatic and good listener, connected to the residents in this community. He says, I'm good at the job and I can do this job because you know what? I'm diplomatic, he says. I'm a good listener, he says. I have hands-on experience with the residents of this community. So let's put the two together. So we talked about Mark right here. He comes from a background where he's a scientist, environmentalist, and he wants to change the community he's living in, right? Not just with nice buzzwords from his climate change or environmentalist, but he lives in the city. He talks about the daycare situation where every parent has a conflict on how to raise the children in the daycare, right? So he is even Mark's portfolio, and you look at Ralston's King. What do you think? It seems like Mark, is good, but how much experience, when you look at Ralston's King's stellar resume, that he's actually been doing? He actually given examples, right? Are you surprised that Ralston King, you're not surprised that Ralston King won, right? You know what? Most often in the US election, a president and a vice president. The vice president sometimes becomes very likely the next president. How does that happen? He is the first among equals, right? The president is. But after the president, it is the vice president, right? So he doesn't need to go and try to search and get there, and do a campaign. The campaign's already there. He just goes on of what the president already had. Do you understand how power relationship, proximity to power changes how you will navigate, how easy it is for you, for people to recognize that's Ralston King right there. Oh, there's a Patrick Mayangi, but we don't know him, right? A strange name, Mayangi, where is he? Is he supported by any party? So there's a million questions bombarded at Patrick Mayangi than Ralston King, because Ralston King is someone that people are familiar with. Do you understand? So I put myself out there, but Mark is also very different. He's not. He uses the example of what he's seen, but how close is he to the power that's happening in the city? Very distant. Maybe closer than I am because of his experience, but very distant. So again, you look at, he talks about dialogue, right? I just want you to see how everything that we've talked about relates to power. People's engagement. I talked about I want to participate and represent. Those are buzzwords. Yes, I wanted to, but then as soon as you step out there, you realize that politics looks at you in the face. Am I qualified enough? It's not because I am black, I am young, I am francophone, a lot of things that you're not qualified, right? The thing about it is that experience sometimes trumps everything. Voters want to know, have you ever led a meeting at City Hall? That question, you get it on campaign because they want to vote for experience, someone to solve their issues. They don't care about your sad story of living in social housing and I had to work for my parents. Those stories are fine. Listen, there are people out there, we can serve you. I think that they'll tell you, we feel like you need to be served rather than you serving people. Do you understand? So sometimes doors are closed because you're not there yet. Right? It is not because they want to be mean. It is not because they're racist. Yes, there is institutional racism, but then you have to understand, where do you fit? and the things that you want to change, right? So it's not just everyone's against me, everyone hates me. Power does not work like that, So, any other questions? Because I think that you guys have captured what I wanted to say. Yes, very true, right? So, okay, can you develop that? So there is, like I said, right? There are those who wield power, and those who don't wield power. And there's also another class of political change. When political change happens, when people are tired, voters have so much power in just casting a vote. But how well do they use that power? Do they understand, the power that they will? So this is why politicians will come at their faces, try to convince them, try to persuade them, try to make them see their point of view, right? Because all they need is just that voice, So you said something about, I'll get to you. You said something about, well, you can have a stellar. You've been part of that group that we want out, right? What other change are you going to bring? Because, you're part of the institution. You're the old club, right? So there comes a time where the power that you wield is unappealing. And that's when limits to power. Power is only limited by power. Foucault says, action only attracts action. So what you see, when I said it began with where power navigates on its own, power can take you out, power can bring you in. Yes. I think that, very good question actually. I think that I came into a state of mindset where, remember when you look at, I talked about our comedian point where you step back. You wanted to be in there, then you realize like, oh my gosh, this is how it is. So while I was stepping back, I realized that one thing, you said they don't care. I meant to say was that it is not good enough. Your story is not good enough to get votes. Okay. Your story is your story. When you deal with mass, there are mass stories out there. Which one should we pick? When we're trying to be efficient. You're applying for a job that you will render service. The experience is a plus, but it was only a plus to how much it can do. It's very limited because what's after your story? Yeah, because the experience is what matters. It's not that you're being mean. So I had to come out of the mindset of everybody hates me, or the city is not seeing me, or there's not a bunch of tools in there. I had to go deep into politics and reflect, how good am I? Am I able to do this? It doesn't say that you shouldn't run. You're running consciously. You're running and knowing that I want my story out there. And I also want to learn. I need to set up the table. I don't want to be basically, removed. And because my story is not good enough to change, I have experience according to what I've learned. But there's also experience that I don't know. This is why I need to sit there because things are not good. You guys don't know how these people are living. Maybe you need someone from that class to sit at the table to talk about the real issues that people are experiencing. There was another hand. You said something very important. Yeah, each candidate's story is different, but then also resources. How much resources get put in political elections? You talk about that recent mayor that run. Do you know how much he spent so that his story may go all the way so that you and I can hear? I ran. Who heard my story? Nobody. So, throughout my political apparatus, the funds, the finances wasn't deep enough to echo out there. We're talking about echo chambers. We're talking about not to negate or dismiss the stories. Stories are created. When there is funds and money put into an individual that we want to win for political reason, we will elevate him to the extreme. We will pump money into his campaign because what we want is change. So that's where support, community, that's where your message has to resonate. If your message doesn't resonate, you won't have partners. You won't have people that are willing to go the extra mile for you, that are willing to volunteer for you, that are willing to give their money for you. Donald Trump, as much as he was against he used that special word, the institution or but he had a following, a massive following, and his money himself, was good, but he needed that massive following. So what I'm trying to say is not to say that, the story isn't believable, and people will not connect with your story. People will connect with your story, but your story will go farther if it runs with money, right? This is why people spend a lot on elections. He spent a lot, even though he had all this experience, but he spent, right? And yes. Yeah, that's a fact too. When there's people who are willing, that it doesn't matter how much the other guy is funded. When there is change comes like an avalanche, right? You can't stop it. When the people are tight, it doesn't matter how much money you put in. People that want change will get you there, right? And it worked out for him, which is great. Anybody else? Yes. How about institutions? I think institutions should have this approach of, I don't know how to explain it, but of well-being for everyone. That there needs to be access and needs to be a means to get there. Most of what stops people, individuals, from attaining, it's the deep-rooted, I'll say it, racism in the institutions or in the class, the powerful class that it's like that, it doesn't change. I go back to Peggy McIntosh, who was talking about when she realizes that, her story, right? And her peers, right? How did she connect to white privilege as a woman, talks about as a woman, and male privilege, right? Now, when you look at it in terms of color, where now she's the main actor, and then, she approaches it in the academic circle, and people talk about it. Her peers are like, oh, it's great, something like that, but it's great to you, but as a male, as a white person, how much are you going to push the message that to change? So sometimes most of the change that we want to do are stopped inside the bureaucracy, inside your institution. People can go out there as much and revolt as much if the institution itself is, freezing. Or, I think the Ward 13, first of all, is very diverse. It's being gentrified right now. There's so much out there for a young person like myself when I ran, person of color, a francophone. It's also a very francophone writing. There's a lot of anglophone that are coming in, but for a resident as myself with the limited opportunities that I had, I did all this with a sheer will to power, to stand. And it opened doors, but it only got me that far. And not to say that, because the voters, I got 135 votes. When I first got that, I was shocked. I wasn't the last, but I was somewhere out there out of 17, right? The guy who won, Ralston King, got 1,400 votes, right? On the by-election, not a lot of people votes, But the realization that, oh my God, I didn't move something. I actually did, because once I lost, I was sad. It was my first loss, being publicly put out there, displayed. You walk in the bus, people be like, oh, you're the guy who ran, right? And then when you lose, you're like, like the guy who wanted to change something. But I started getting emails of people encouraging me. Not because I failed. They said, you only didn't get to it because people don't know you. Do it again and have more exposure, and people will start voting for you. People want to connect with your message. Like, I don't know the mayor, the New York mayor, the new one, his story, but it didn't just happen like this. He probably worked on it and never gave up when people were like, oh, you'll never be mayor. You know, he didn't let that stop him. So just like in my journey, which I still believe that, hey, I'll be MP one day, right? By constantly doing and never letting myself be stopped, it just opens new realities, right? From, I want to finish very quick. From working at McDonald's and running, who thought that my loss will bring the premier? You know, I became visible. As a visible minority, the word visibility isn't there, but everywhere invisible. So you became visible on that stage and people heard you, and it is your doing, your own power. Because, you know, if it was left to the state, if it was left to others, they wouldn't see you, you know? So I basically came out. So when I see, it got me to work, you know, work for ministers. I worked at Queen's Park, you know, I worked in different ministries to tell you that the vision of Ward 13 was something that I went to saying, I want to fix my home. I want to be better. I want to have a lot more things in my fridge. But look how it turns. It goes beyond just my personal needs. It went for me helping and servicing places that I dreamed of, or people that I couldn't attain if I didn't decide to step out and have that courage to stand. Right? So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question a bit, but yeah.